In this video, we'll be creating a hitbox and hurtbox system so we can start adding things like enemies and area hazards to the game. We're going to be designing this in a very building block kind of way so we can use these in other scenes as a custom node and not have to recreate the same code over and over again. We'll also be creating two other types of nodes to handle health and death of any other scene that actually needs that functionality. In a future video, we'll be adding things like resistances, buffs and debuffs, on-hit or on-death effects, and a lot more. If you'd like to see that, make sure to hit the subscribe button and also hit that bell. Also, make sure to leave a comment or suggestion for any mechanic you'd like to see built or have any other issues with the code. Now, let's move into our editor and start the setup. So, for the concept of a character taking damage, there's a few things we actually need to think about. The first one is how health is managed. Second one would be how death is managed, and then using hitboxes or hurtboxes to actually connect those two together. Now, I've always found that creating hitboxes and handling all of this stuff is easier done backwards, which might sound a bit weird, but I'll show you what I mean now. The very first thing I'm going to do is create a new node. It's going to be of other node. It's going to be of type node, and this is going to be called our death underscore handler. Now, all this is going to do is handle death. We're going to hit Ctrl S to save this in a handlers folder, and then we're going to give it a script. Now, I like having things like this quite segmented because having an individual handler like this, one, lets me kind of modify things specifically, and two, it allows me to modify things in a way where I can add to things a lot easier. Like, say on death, I want something to play an effect. Well, it's easier to add to another node than it is to just add to one really, really large or really massive script. So let's give this a class name of death handler. And then we're going to need to give it a variable for an exported variable for its parent. Now, the reason why we're calling it parent specifically, and we're going to typecast this as a node 2D, is because this isn't just going to be for the player, it can be for pretty much anything that needs to quote-unquote die. So in this instance, the player, but in another instance, say you're making a shooting game about zombies need to die, or a barrel that needs to break. This can handle the same thing. So we're going to typecast that as a node 2D, and then we're going to set it equal to null. And we'll set that up after we've actually sorted the scripting out for it. So we're going to want to create a new signal, and it's going to be for handle underscore death. Now, this is an internal signal, so only things that can access this kind of internally will be able to use it, or access this specifically will be able to use it, which is very useful. So in our ready function, we are going to type handle death dot connect, and we're going to connect this to a callable or another function called on handle underscore death. Create that function. Give it a void return type because it's not doing anything as a return. And then all it's going to do is grab the parent, and then it's going to call the queue-free functionality. This will delete the parent. And if you've gone and set things up in a decent enough way, say like your camera and stuff is disconnected, this won't cause any issues when you queue free the parent. Now, there is one thing that I will be covering a little bit better in this video. Somebody said to me in another video, comment basically said, they asked me why I was writing signals the way I was writing them. I would use, here as a example, I would write connect, and then I would use the string version of the signal, and then I would use the function. Now, I do this primarily out of, it's a mix of habit and preference. Now, you can just do this where you call the signal and then you use .connect, and then you basically create the function for it. This is a less error-prone way, or user error-prone way of doing it. You can't really have any real typos that can cause problems. So from now on, this is probably what I'll be using. But with our def handler set up, let's go back to our player. Let's hit Ctrl-Shift-A to add, and we're going to add our death handler. Now, the death handler, as I said, needs to be assigned a parent. So we're going to assign our player's root node, going to put this up here above the input handler. Now that's our deaths sorted, but we need something to actually call that signal. So now we're going to go and create the health handler. And it'll be same process, create a new scene of type node, call it health_handler, hit Control S to save in the handlers folder, give it a script, hit create, give it a class name, call it health handler. And then we're going to need to give it two exported variables. The first one is going to be for the base underscore exported var base underscore health underscore max. This is going to be the maximum value of our health that it can possibly go to. Int equals 10. Set it to 10, why not? And then we're going to need to give it a export variable for our death handler, because what's going to happen is the health handler, when health hits a certain number, in this case 0, it will call that signal on the death handler. And when we set it up as an export, it means if the death handler doesn't exist and we do a correct null check, it won't just immediately crash things. Whereas if you have path-specific things, it could possibly have some issues. Or if you just forget to add a death handler, we will set that equal to null. Now let's create a variable for our current health. This will be of a type int, and we'll set that equal to 0. And then let's create a new signal for apply underscore damage. It's going to need a value that's going to be of type int. And then create our ready function. So this signal, and now there's a reason why I'm doing it this specific way. Creating one specific signal for applying damage means we will of course be able to call what that specific signal for applying damage, right? Whereas we could create another signal for applying healing, and it could do pretty much the same thing but opposite. So in this case, we're going to type apply damage dot connect. And then we are going to create a new function for on apply underscore damage. Copy that, create a new function for it. This will take, of course, that value, which is the of type int. It will have a void return. And for now, we're going to hit pass, or we're going to write pass, because before we get into the logic of how the signal will get called, we actually need to just create a basic function for handling our health that will be used frequently, or all the time, right? So let's create that. Func handle underscore health. It'll have no parameters, and it'll be a void return type. Now, we're going to do a simple check for if current health is greater than 0, and if it is, we want it to return out. Now, this is a bit of a odd check, right? This is very circumstantial on if you actually want to have this check in place. I personally like to do it. That way this code block doesn't always get ran. This is primarily for sitting there and going, is my health below X number? Now, if you wanted to say, have an overheal function and you wanted to check that somewhere in here, you would have to put that above this specific check. So moving on, let's actually go and sort out the logic for if our health hits 0 or goes below 0. So if current health is less than or equal to 0, we want to do something. Well, we never want our health to go into the negatives. So let's first set our current health equal to 0. That way that never goes negative. And when we start using this in, say, some UI elements, the UI elements don't freak out and start showing negative numbers either. Now we're going to want to check if our death handler is equal to null, meaning we have either forgot to assign it or something's gone wrong. And if it is, this is primarily for us as developers to kind of look at and go, okay, this is the error that I've made. It's always a nice habit to get into. We're going to print out error death underscore handler unassigned. This way, when put a dash between that, if we forget to do this, we'll see in our output, oh, okay, that's what's actually going on, that's what's happening. And if that's the case, we want to return out of the statement. Now, if that's not the case, we want to call our death handler, and then we want to call that handle death signal. And then at the very end, we want to type dot init. Now, what this is going to do is check if our current health is above zero. If it is, do nothing. If it is below, it's going to make sure that we set our health to 0. Then we're going to check if our death handler exists. And if it does, we're going to emit that signal we just created on the death handler, which will run the block of code for handling the death and then queue-freeing the parent. So let's hit Control S and save this. Now, let's move back into our onApplyDamage function. We are going to first want to make sure that we call handle health, and then we're going to do an if check. So if the value is above 0, my brain stopped working there, then we're going to want to do another thing, right? So we're going to create a new function above this. Now, the reason why I am putting my functions above this specific function is this is a signal called function. I prefer to have those at the bottom of the script. It just habit, I suppose, I got into. So let's create a new function for calculate underscore damage. It's going to take the value and it's going to be of type int, and it'll of course have a void return. Now, here is the super complex math behind calculating damage, right? Because we're going to have all of those different things for resistances, buffs, debuffs. That would pretty much go in here. But for us, the most complicated part is just going current health minus equals value. Because there's no extra math we actually need to do. This is it. So if our value is greater than 0, we now want to call calculate damage and pass in the value. And that is our health handler set and sorted. Basically, we now just need to figure out a way of signaling or calling this signal for applying the damage. When that happens, it will call the onApplyDamage, which will run the health check, and if we are dead, then it'll emit the signal, and if we are not, it's going to do the damage, or calculate the damage and then apply the damage. So the next thing we actually need to create is our hitboxes and hurtboxes so we can connect these things together. So let's go into a new node. This is going to be of area 2D, and we're going to need to rename this. This is going to be for our hit underscore box. And then we're going to hit Control A to add, and we're going to add a collision shape to it. Now, we don't actually need to give this shape a shape. Hell, you don't even need to really add a collision shape to this. You can do this all after the fact when you've kind of attached it to something. So in this case, I'm just going to leave the collision shape 2D there and kind of leave it at that. Actually, no, we're going to remove the collision shape so I can show you this works in kind of multiple different ways. So with our hitbox created, we are going to want to go and save this into a new folder. And this will be for our we'll just call it hitbox, because I'm going to be saving a hurtbox in here as well. So we'll save that. We'll give it a script. Now let's give it a class name of hitbox. And then we're going to create a new signal for apply underscore hit. It's going to take a damage or value, and it's going to be of type int. Now, to make sure that this kind of functions in the way we want it to, we're also going to want to add a exported var for a health underscore handler of type health handler. I'm going to set that equal to null to start. Now, here's a thing that I always get confused on: hitboxes and hurtboxes. Hitboxes, in my eyes, will accept the hit and do the thing. Hurt boxes are the thing that does the damage, right? So the hitbox is going to be slapped onto any character that requires a health and kind of damage application done, right? Whereas a hurt box will be slapped onto things like weapons or spike traps or anything along those lines. In this instance, the hitbox is going to need a way to actually apply damage dealt to it. So let's create a new function. Let's call it, or let's load up the ready function, sorry. Then we're going to want to connect our apply hit, and then we're going to connect that to on apply hit. Let's go create that on apply hit function. We know that it's going to take a damage of type int. It's going to be a void return, and then we'll type pass. Because one thing that's always really good habit to get into is doing your null checks. Null checks will make it so if things crash, well, things won't crash if something doesn't exist, and that's always nice to have. Now, a crash is actually a really important thing. You've got to remember that. Crashes aren't always bad. Crashes let you know something's wrong, right? So that's why when doing null checks, you also want to make sure you give yourself something that will tell you that the null check is being hit and ran, right? So we're going to check if our health handler is equal to null. And if it is, we're going to print, same thing we did last time, error, health underscore handler unassigned. Did I spell that correctly? Yep. And then we're going to return out. This way, if I forget to say add the health handler to this, which I am known to do, I am very good at forgetting to actually apply things sometimes, it'll just give me that error and then return out. So nothing will break, which is nice. So now, if our health handler does not equal null, and we've managed to set it, or we've remembered to, we're going to take our health handler, we're going to call the apply damage signal, then we're going to call emit from that, and then pass in the damage, or the value that we're passing, well, we're supposed to be passing in. Now, that's great and all, but what's going to be applying this, or actually getting this to run, right? Let's go and create a new scene, once again, of area 2D. We're going to call this one the hurt box. We're going to hit Control S, go to save it, give it a new script, give it a new class name of hurt underscore, no underscore, there we go, hurt box. One thing to keep in mind is I have no specific way of handling damage from separate things right now, right? So what I'm doing is var temp underscore damage. This is going to be a temporary variable that will eventually get substituted out for when I start applying statuses or giving things a bit more inbuilt and more hard set numbers, right? So for now, this is just going to be a temporary stat. So this will be of type int, and we're going to set it equal to 1. Now we want to pull up our ready function, and we want to connect the area entered signal that the area 2D always has onto it. And we're going to connect this to on underscore area underscore entered. Another thing to show off with signals very quickly is if you actually click on the area 2D, you go to node, you can go to signals, and then you go to these signals here, you can actually double click on these and then choose which script to connect it from, and it'll create an automatic method for you. Now, personally, I kind of dislike doing this here. I'm going to hit Control X to cut, and I'm going to write in pass for now in our ready function, just so I can show this off. I'm going to add this signal. Now, you see here that there's this little symbol, right? This will allow us to see what the connection is and where it's being connected from. Now, the thing with that is, for me, my eyes suck and I always forget what this symbol actually means. I genuinely forget it exists. So what I'm going to do is disconnect this signal. So disconnect all. So this is now no longer being used, and remove that method. And the reason I'm doing that is because I personally prefer seeing the signals in my ready function, or more specifically, I will create an entire function around connecting and emitting signals usually. In this case, it would be for, I would literally just not need to do it for like a single signal script, but in the future I would usually, if it's a script that has many signals, I would write func handle underscore signals void, and then I would write my signals inside here, and then at the very top of my ready script I would just call the handle signals function. This way my brain goes, there's a functionality for this, and I can click on it and it'll take me directly to the line, and then I can see which signals exist. Basically, long story short, I like to visibly see things that aren't tiny icons. Moving forward, let's actually create this on area entered function. So func on underscore area underscore entered. Make it void return type. Now, on area entered takes some specific parameters. If you want to know what it takes, you can click on your Hitbox. You can go to area entered signal, because that's the one that we're connecting, and it takes an area of area 2D. So it takes a named thing, in this case an area. It's going to be of type area 2D. Now let's do one simple check. We're going to check if the area, so if area, then we're going to use the is keyword. Is really great for checking class specific things, or in this case, what the class of the script on top of the area is. So we're going to check if the area is a hitbox. And if it is, we're going to call the area dot apply hit dot emit, and we're going to emit the temp damage as a parentheses or parameter. And that is our hitboxes and hurtboxes actually coded up and ready. Now let's go to our player. Let's use Control-Shift-A to add the health handler, because we're going to need that. So let's remember what is required. Our health handler needs a death handler assigned to it, so let's assign that. It's going to need, like our player will also need a hitbox. So let's grab the hitbox, move that up above the health handler. Remember that we need to add a collision shape to it, so we'll hit Control-A to add whilst highlighting the hitbox. We're going to add our collision shape. I'm going to hide these extra collision shapes for now, and then in our new collision shape we are going to actually sort this out and actually set it up. Now, good thing to keep in mind is the area that the player can take damage should be smaller than the area, than the actual player model itself. Now, the reason for this is because you want to be give players kind of leniency, right? You want to actually make it so it feels fair. So I don't know, say something shoots at this level and it goes past the character. It might look a little bit odd at first, but players will be genuinely happy that they didn't get hit by a random projectile that they couldn't dodge out of the way of, right? So making it lenient, making it smaller than the actual player, usually a good idea. I'm going to hit Control S and save. Now, one thing to keep in mind is the layering system of the Area 2D. So right now, this is on the level layer and the level mask. Now, the layer that it's on is what things will be able to look for, and the mask is what will be looking for things, right? It'll be looking for the things on the on the actual layer, whereas vice versa. That's always confusing to explain to me. Basically, we want this on the player layer, and that's it, because this isn't looking for anything. Now, let's go and set up a new scene. This will be of, well, this kind of really depends on how you want to set up your scenes, I guess. For me, I'm going to be creating a really basic spike trap. So all I'm going to need is a sprite. I'm going to call this spike underscore trap. This is going to need a, I'm pressing the wrong buttons, Control-Shift-A. It's going to need a hurtbox. And that's going to need a collision shape. Now let's add some spikes to the sprite. Got to find them. I have gone past them. There we go. Some spikes. Now I'm going to go into the offset. I'm going to give this a -9 pixel offset. And then we're going to check the collision shape. We're going to set this up to make it a little bit, once again, lenient for the player. There we go. I usually like to do like inside the outlines. Tends to feel good for people. Now I'm going to hit Control S and save. I'm going to save this into a new folder. I'm going to call it level_hazards. And then another one, we'll call this spike trap. And we need to now make this actually look for the player layer, right? So this doesn't need to exist on any layer other than level, but it does need to be looking for the player layer because that's the layer the hitbox is on. So we're going to hit Control S and save. Now I'm going to save the player. I'm going to go to my test level and I'm going to start layering some spikes around. Now I'm putting this on the level specifically because level hazards don't need to really usually be spawned in unless you're doing some randomization type deal. In this case, I'm not going to be. So I'm going to use Control-Shift-A and add a spike trap. Now we're going to move this spike trap and we are going to put it up here. Then I'm going to use Control-D to duplicate. Move it across. If you hold down Control whilst you're moving, you lock it to its axes. Use Control-D to duplicate again, and again, and again, and again. One more time. There we go. Now, we've made our little spiky platform. Let's go and check and see if this is actually working. So let's go back to our player. Let's go and make sure, as you can see, I forgot to apply the health handler to this. So let's apply the health handler. Make sure all of our handlers are set up. Health handler done, done, done. Now, let's hit F5 and check. Go run towards the spikes, land on spikes, and we immediately died. Let's go see why. So one thing I forgot to do, of course, is to go into our ready function, into our health handler specifically. So we're going to go into the ready function of that, and we're going to set our current health equal to our base max health. Now, we saw the fact that it works and the player dies and gets Q-freed, nothing breaks, everything's awesome. Let's go and make sure that that's working the way we want it to. Now, I'm going to go to the player real quick. I'm going to change the health down to 2. And we'll see how long our player can last. 1, 2, immediately dead. And that is how you handle and sort out hitboxes, hurtboxes, and do some basic stat management for player health. Or health in general. Now, as I said, damage is a different kind of beast in of itself and how you actually apply that and hold that. One thing that you could do is you could add a script to the spike trap, which has its specific damage. If you want to do some heavy math around damage and things like that, give things certain buffs to damage, you could create an entire new custom node just for handling all of that math, and then it will return a number that you could then link into the hurtbox with an exported variable or pretty much anything along those lines, or a signal really. Yes, that will be hurtboxes and hitboxes handled. I hope you enjoyed. If you have any issues or any suggestions, please leave a comment, make sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.